Lewis and I are going to talk to everybody today about the topic of PLM. So if you're interested in PLM, it's going to be an exciting one. Lewis is the Senior Director of Business Process Consulting at Archer Gray, and he's got decades of experience and hundreds of years of knowledge, and he's going to drop some for you today on this quick 30.
You make me feel a little old.
So, Lewis, I did a quick intro, but why don't you give everybody a little introduction and exposure to who you are?
Okay. I've had decades of experience, as Patrick mentioned, really probably just around 20 years in the consulting field, specializing in the kind of domain of product lifecycle management, or PLM, as you all are mostly aware. It started out with one of the, at the time, big six consulting firms, Price Waterhouse, which became Price Waterhouse Coopers, while I was there. And we did strategic briefings on PLM. And that was where I got an overview of, at the time, the major PLM systems. I moved from there to focus on consulting around the functional and the business process aspects of a particular PLM platform, which happened to be PTC's Windchill platform in its early days. And since then, probably the next 18 years since then, I've spent with various PLM platforms, primarily PTC's Windchill, but also Oracle Agile, Dassault Systems Innovia product, it's now Siemens Teamcenter product, and Aris Innovator. So I've got a nice, well-rounded functional understanding of most of the major PLM platforms, because my job has been primarily the business strategist, the business process and organizational change management expert on the product teams. I have installed and implemented the software, but I'm more comfortable working with the client around their needs and translating those needs into software requirements and functionality.
When you think about all of the decades that you've been
Thanks for keep bringing that up.
I'll lighten it up a little bit. When you think about all the years that have gone by and the different clients that you've worked with, the industry has evolved, but the acronym PLM has remained. And as we go into the future, the definition is changing, right? So I'm curious how you would define PLM. Let's look at it from the highest level of just simply looking at the past, present, and the future.
Okay.
So if you take those three items, let's define the past. Just take a minute to give us a definition of what you think PLM is defined of old, if somebody implemented it, let's say 10, 15 years ago.
Sure. Looking back 10 or 15 years ago, PLM was essentially a set of loosely coupled software tools. And, an implementation was a custom software project. It would take anywhere from 12 to 36 months sometimes, typical PLM implementation, which was done like any other very large software development effort. It was, the way of implementing at the time was the waterfall approach, which is the way most large software projects were implemented. Since the PLM software itself was really a toolbox of software code pieces, the customer basically had to provide all of the requirements, and then the software vendor, their consulting organizations, or sometimes third-party companies like management consulting firms, would then spend, as I said, months to years, taking those pieces and building, those pieces together, adding custom design pieces to meet very specific customer requirements. And so the customer would get what they wanted. I'm not going to name the vendor, but one of the jokes within the consulting practice that I belonged to was, the software could do anything the customer wanted, just nothing for under $1 million in
Right.
services costs. So, they were very expensive undertakings. And in the past, the customer would tend to get exactly what they wanted or close to it. But it also usually involved cost overruns because the software may not have been capable of doing the job in exactly the way the customer required it to be done. And so the approach was to meet the customer requirements as they required them.
So when you think about the acronym PLM, Product Lifecycle Management, and the utopian definition as it's been defined throughout the years, following the life cycle of the entire product, do you feel like your past definition of PLM was capable of fulfilling that functionality?
So I think the definition of product lifecycle management was aspirational. I think that was the software capable. Those that spent enough time and money, and I meant a lot of time and a lot of money, may have gotten what they asked for. Now, was what they asked for what they needed, or after the years of defining it and developing it, was it what they needed 3 years later based on what they had envisioned 3 years prior? Oftentimes, no. As I mentioned, it being aspirational, I think companies still struggle with the aspirational goal of product lifecycle management being that it handles all of the product information across the entire enterprise, across multiple business functions. In the 20 years that I've been involved, and I think the industry itself is probably maybe 30 years old, companies still struggle with the full package, trying to achieve that vision of PLM. Most often they either stop due to fatigue. Right? It takes a long time to implement something, and once they finally have something working, they don't want to go through the pain and effort of implementing more. Oftentimes they're a victim of early successes, where it's, hey, we've got this part for the engineers working, and let's not invest more because it seems like it's a good engineering system. Even though the vision of PLM was to span multiple departments, multiple groups within a company, very, very similar and analogous to what an ERP or enterprise resource planning application does across the business. But oftentimes, where it is successful, it then struggles to get beyond that initial success.
All right. I appreciate you diving into that one. And depending on which customer I've spoken to historically, I still run into a lot of clients that use the term PLM, but they're really only managing their engineering data related to the product. And so fatigue is a pretty accurate word to describe it, because people will implement, finish a migration, and usually it's the migrations that cause the fatigue.
Yes.
Because the time span extends so much. All right, so let's just package that as the definition of the past, right, for now. And so moving into the present, how would you define PLM today?
Well, so PLM today, again, same aspirational goal, managing more product information. Companies are starting to, I think, move more toward that goal, in terms of they've gotten all of the value, I think, that they can out of having PLM only manage the engineering data. The PLM vendors themselves are also adding capabilities to the software that speak to more of the needs of those other departments, like the manufacturing organization or the services organization. Now on the fringes, even now, are things that support the marketing organization. And so companies what I've seen in the present now, that companies are starting to think more seriously about a roadmap of taking the software that they have either already invested in and taking that as the first mile marker, right, on a roadmap, and seeing the most logical path to this to the additional capabilities. Because in most companies, PLM is like the old adage, you're only using 10% of your brain. Most companies are only using 10% of the PLM capability that they're paying licenses for, maintenance for, subscriptions for. And so I think, organizations are starting in this age of, better asset utilization to say, we've got this huge asset. And instead of continuing to buy or enhance these point solutions that we've had and people are comfortable with, we're sitting on this big gold mine of a PLM system that we're just really using 10% of it.
Yeah, I want to revisit that last point that you made about how people, what you define that 10% and how we can expand that 10% where people can take more advantage of the functionality that exists. But let's define the future now of PLM. So we've got a good basis of past and some of the challenges and hurdles and successes of days of old, and you just define the present. So when we're looking at the future, how would you define that?
I think the future of PLM is becoming a little circular, and a reflection of one thing that spurred PLM initially, and that's three-dimensional geometry. And what I mean by that is the match before PLM was computer-aided design. And the computer-aided design started off as a electronic replacement of manual drafting, in which an engineer or a drafter had a three-dimensional image in their head, and they documented it on paper. And by necessity, right, they had to document it in two-dimensional views. And so the convention was, you do three faces of a three-dimensional object that you have in your imagination to get it down on paper so other people could benefit from it with two-dimensional drawings. Then the early innovation in CAD was then three-dimensional solid modeling, so that an engineer can take that three-dimensional idea or concept in their head and model it. You can use it as an analogy. It went from drawings to, say, sculpture, and in a computer. Now, again, that was in the computer. What was usually done is two-dimensional. It was used to more efficiently make two-dimensional drawings. So the humans still went back to the process of communicating in two dimensions. PLM took that innovation of 3D CAD, which was used really just an efficient way to produce two-dimensional drawings. PLM became a necessity because three-dimensional CAD had more complex file relationships, and it was related to bills of material, which are the list of components that went into the product being designed. And so PLM was an answer to manage the complexity of that data. But PLM was also one-dimensional or two-dimensional. If you looked at most PLM screens, it's a series of tables, tree structures, and a lot of text.
Yeah.
Maybe a few would have some small bit of imagery. Visualization was incorporated, maybe 15 years ago, more strongly, but it wasn't it was the tail on the dog, the visualization piece. Where I see the future is getting now to where the three-dimensional aspect is becoming the centerpiece of the PLM systems, where that three-dimensional object, after it's designed, is being then reused throughout the rest of the organization. So that, say, you're manufacturing, instead of the traditional way of creating text-based assembly documents with maybe drawings, maybe photographs, right? And if you use a photograph, that means you actually have to have created the product to try to assemble the product before you can document the process of assembling the product. Now companies are starting to drive to reusing that three-dimensional object throughout the business. So say manufacturing now is leveraging the three-dimensional object before any physical pieces are made to design the manufacturing process.
So I've got a game for you.
All right.
I might make you
games.
I might make you sweat on this.
I do sweat.
Are you ready?
Go for it.
All right. So I'm an executive. All right. And I tell you, there's 3 executives in the room. Okay.
Oh, wow.
There's the past,
Making it tough on me.
the present, and the future.
The ghost of PLM past, the present,
ghost
and
of-
future.
You got it. So you've got 30 seconds to tell them from an ROI perspective, and I'm not talking numbers, but speaking in executives' terms or viewpoint of the entire enterprise, why invest in PLM? Is that a fair question? Are you up for this challenge?
I wish this wasn't live, but
All right. So let's see what we do with it. So past 30 seconds.
so 30 seconds to talk to the ghost of PLM past about the investment.
That's right.
How are you doing, Mr. Executive from the past? I know that you've invested in a PLM system and it was heavily customized and you've been using it for the last 15 years. And what you've probably gathered thus far is, your organization is hindered, in the fact that you're using a tool that was designed for the way you design products, 15 or 20 or so years ago. And your market has changed. You probably have to diversify your products. And your system is probably holding you back in that regard. So you're spending more time supporting the system as opposed to the system supporting you.
That's pretty good.
All right.
All right. You're on a roll. So now, is it a ghost if it's present? The ghost of present.
I guess he could die today.
He could. So you got 30 seconds to talk to an executive on the ROI of PLM using the definition of PLM today.
Mr. Present Day Executive. Let me talk to you a little bit about the return you would get on an investment today in PLM. PLM as a whole is becoming much more responsive to your market needs today. Needs of, say, mass customization, where your customers are no longer satisfied with buying one product of thousands of products where everyone has the same product that they want. And in order to respond and be flexible to not just your customers but your competitors, you need a system that gives you that flexibility, so that the designs that your brilliant designers and engineers come up with are rapidly translated into manufacturable, high quality physical products that, if you're in an industry where your products have to be serviced after the sale, you also want to then extend that flexibility and that capability into your sales and aftermarket. Because again, the trend today is, consumers are moving, further into a shared economy, the gig economy, leasing versus buying. So now in most industrial businesses, their aftermarket and their service as a revenue stream are becoming more and more important. So the idea of increased complexity of your product and increased need to generate revenue through aftermarket and services means you have to have a PLM platform that can handle that complexity. And that's not just through design, but also through manufacture, so that you can manufacture in smaller units of one ultimately, and such that you can service and you can develop services documentation and scale to the size of it where you're shipping units of one. And I would say that is an imperative today, because if you're not doing it, you can bet that your competitors are.
Sold.
Thank you.
Last one.
All right.
Last one.
All right. Now I have to put my science fiction hat on.
That's right. Beam me up to the future. What's your 30-second pitch?
All right, Madam CEO. I'd like to talk a little bit about where PLM is heading. And within the next few years, you're looking at needing to be able to communicate to your customer base in terms of, visualization, immersion of your product in a virtual fashion. Augmented reality, virtual reality are kind of nascent industries right now. The Internet of Things allows sensors to be placed in your products to provide so much rich information that you're going to need that ability to digest within your organization user behavior, big data, aggregate data, such that data can be turned around to be converted into the information that your product development teams need to generate not just physical products, but totally new business models that combine physical products with services. Some physical products in the future are moving to just a way to deliver a service, a totally new business model. One thing that, a potential trend is your automakers starting to design cars, not for individual consumers, but for the shared services, the Lyft and the Uber drivers. So think about that. How would you change the design of a vehicle to meet the needs of the Uber driver? So you're looking at, the cost that an individual can pay in terms of the changes in the usage pattern of the vehicle. And then you couple that with individuals no longer may even want to buy a car, right? I just saw a commercial just the other day, and I don't know the name of the company. I can't remember the name. I think it was Find.com. I don't know how it works. I haven't dug into it, but they're advocating you just go online, you give your needs, your budgetary range. I imagine they run a credit report, what you're willing to pay a month, and they give you a list of cars that you just pay on a monthly basis for, and you can turn it in, replace it with another car for the same monthly payment anytime you want. Curious as to know how that business model will work, but again, that's a canary in the gold mine, in the mine of where PLM is going. You'll need to be able to design for business models like that did not exist, that are just starting to be created today, and certainly didn't exist 15 years ago.
So thanks for diving into all those great answers. I'm glad that you were up for the challenge. The one thing that I think about in each of those scenarios bring me back to the survey that we recently did.
Oh yeah, great.
With PLM and the digital enterprise, and we ended up going out to about 150 clients out in the industry, all associated to PLM, but you hear all of this terminology around the digital thread, digital transformation. What does it all mean, and how is it being applied? And what we wanted to figure out was, where are people prioritizing their budget in relation to all of these different topics? So that survey report's actually on our website now. It's being released, but the one thing that kind of bubbled up from everything that you described, from the past, present, and the future, and it's a big topic within that report as well, is, and this kind of goes back to that 10%, people are using 10% of their PLM system, right?
Okay.
It's what is the strategy from where folks are today, and where are they going, and how do they get there? I recall you doing a workshop at the local PLM gathering event that we hold in the Midwest, which is comprised of, 15 clients, directors, and VPs of PLM, right?
Yes.
And the topic was around how do you sell the value of PLM so you get the funding to pursue your roadmap. So walk us through a little bit of how you approach those situations to coach a client through.
Sure. So, most clients, or most individuals who are PLM champions, that's typically the person who has to support the PLM application within the organization. Typically, they're in engineering, engineering services, or an IT function, which support a lot of times of the engineering group, right? And as we mentioned, where PLM has expanded, and most companies are still at the 10% usage of that, it's difficult for that person to get mind share outside of their engineering internal customers. And again, it's because PLM has expanded, but most of the decision makers within the corporation have not been really privy to or aware of that expansion. So that person has to figure out how, if they want to expand PLM into other departments such as manufacturing or aftermarket and sales or marketing, how do they get buy-in from the decision makers, those vice presidents of those departments? Mm-hmm. And how do they get how do they get that information to the people with the purse strings, like the chief financial officer, and the ultimate to use the term deciderer, right? The chief executive officer. How do they do that, right? Because they typically have spoken in engineering terms or IT terms to other people in engineering or IT. And so, we will advise clients to use some tools, from the innovation field, and build a profile of your target audience. If you know that you need to get, say, the head of marketing, manufacturing, and aftermarket involved, then you need 3 different messages. And you need to first tie PLM to business value. And it's not a generic business value, or it's not even the business value that you want. It's the business value that they would want. Aftermarket wants to sell more parts, and especially if their vehicles are customized vehicles, it becomes difficult for them to create custom manuals to know exactly which part went on which particular VIN number or serial number of a vehicle. So you want to develop a message that shows how PLM can help them achieve their business objectives, right? A separate message for the manufacturing, say, vice president, even a third message for the marketing vice president. Now, are you being, deceitful? No. PLM is many things to many people. And you're just trying to help them understand that the value, people will purchase, they spend money on what they value, not what you value or what others value. So you have to make a compelling case for your PLM investment to others, in the language that they can understand. And if along the way you get what you need, right, that's the ideal scenario.
Yeah, I was sitting in that room when you gave that presentation, and we went through the workshop collectively, and I think we had 13 different clients there, and they got a lot of benefit from it. And I even got post feedback from them, and this is ranging from Fortune 500 to, if there is a Fortune 3000. There's various sizes of clients. Yeah, fortunate. Yeah, exactly. So, well, listen, I think our time's up for the quick 30. But Louis, I want to thank you for sitting down and walking through, helping us define and shape the past, present, and the future, and helping, hopefully, the audience understand some ways that they can sell internally to make advancements on their roadmap all related to PLM. Thanks a lot, Louis.